Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is our third episode for The Gathering Storm, Book 12 of the series. I've been having a ton of fun with this book. I frankly don't really need to go into very much here at the beginning of this video, other than to say that I read chapters 27 through 37 for this week's reading, and took about 7 hours to do so, putting my total reading time for The Gathering Storm at 21 and a half hours so far. I expect to finish the book with probably around 29 or so, maybe 30 hours of reading total, maybe even a little bit less depending on how quickly some of the upcoming sequences go, because, well, I know at least one of the upcoming sequences is probably going to be quite quick, and granted, that's only at a guess, compared to the last couple episodes of the series where I knew what was happening in week 2's diary when I recorded the first one, because I had read all of that content already, and so I was able to kind of reflect on the first weeks of reading, or the first week's reading, because I had the second week's reading in context along with it. In comparison, this week, I have no idea what's coming next week in the finale of this book, but I am excited for it. To start things off, just on a spoiler-free context, this section, very good. Just very good. There's a lot of political stuff going on. I mean, that's been the story of the entire book up to this point, really. The Gathering Storm has really been a politically driven novel that has really shifted the scope of what's going down and why everything is going down the way that it is, in ways that is just so fun and interesting, and that I'm really looking forward to exploring even further next week, even though I think next week is going to be the big, the big sequence of, well, it's going to be the climax, it's going to be the finale, it's going to be the big conclusion to the book, and I have very little idea what's going to happen next week, but because of what has happened in this week's reading and what I'm anticipating from the rest of the book, I think I have a pretty good idea of what what Towers of Midnight is going to be covering, and that's something that's pretty interesting. My reading this week, like I said, has gone very well. I've been having a ton of fun with it. It's been focused on some slightly different things and in some slightly different ways than I was anticipating. For example, most of the book up to this point has been largely focused on White Tower and Rand plot lines, so stuff going on between those two different storylines. This week, there's basically no White Tower stuff to actually cover. Instead, we got a little bit more Matt POV focus in this week's reading, and Rand's storyline was still pretty front and center, but also did some things in like I said, a different way than I was expecting. The moment in the chapter that I just finished reading this morning, the most recent chapter 37, if I'm not mistaken, I'll double check to make sure I'm not lying about that. Yeah, what happens in chapter 37, the last chapter for this week's reading, is stuff that I expected to basically finish off Rand's plotline in this book. I expected that to be the big conclusion, and it was not. So I have no idea what's going to happen with his storyline from this point forward, because it's already happened. So there's some big stuff to talk about this week. Thankfully, the structure of what I'm going to cover is not going to be quite so seemingly random, or not quite so back and forth as it was last week, for example, although I will still be covering storylines more or less. Well, I mean, this week it will be in order, basically. So there is one White Tower related chapter to go over that basically just kind of follows up on some of the material that we already talked about last week. That's going to be chapter 30. That will start off the spoiler section. And then we're going to go into Matt's storyline for the week, which will be chapters 27 and 28, then 34, and then part of 36. And once we have covered chapter 36, we will go on to what is happening in Rand's plotline, which will be the rest of this week's reading, essentially. And it'll basically just be that order. I won't have to jump between storylines, because even the other major POVs that occur within Rand's storyline, as I'm delineating it here, are still, relevant to what's going on with Rand. So basically can just call it all that. So yeah, that's how we're going to start off the spoiler section, is by covering chapter 30. In Chapter 30, it is another Gawain POV, and like I said, this basically isn't really doing that much. It's more so just kind of following up on some of what we got in last week's reading, and that sees Gawain meeting with Romanda and Lelaine intermittently. He's mentioned that he has met with both of these figures in the Rebel Aes Sedai camp multiple times, and he has his thoughts about how they kind of uphold Egwene's wishes and their resistance to various different suggestions of his. This particular scene, I believe, is a meeting with Romanda. He's basically just trying to convince them and the rest of the rebels at this point that Egwene does in fact need rescuing, and that she might not be telling the full truth to the degree that he perceives the truth, his perspective, that she might just be saying she doesn't need rescuing for some like personal reasons or dignity or something silly like that, but that she actually just needs rescuing. But interestingly, they only seem to take the meetings with Gawain as basically opportunities to ask about other subjects. In this particular case, in Chapter 30, Romanda asks Gawain a lot about Elaine and about Caemlyn, about the political situation there, which, kind of follows up on the previous Gawain chapter that we had gotten from last week's reading, where we basically had, what's his name, Gareth, his old mentor, telling him that he needed to go back to Caemlyn to, be there for political reasons, to not be involved with the Aes Sedai because it would be dangerous, and also because Elaine would need him. So there's that suggestion, and now the Aes Sedai here are trying to get information about Andor, about those politics from Gawain. Like I said, they don't really take his meetings seriously in the way that he wants them to personally, which isn't really much of a problem, to be honest, because he is quite deluded in certain ways. But anyway, following one such spat, I lied, it wasn't Romanda in this chapter. He was meeting with Lelaine in Chapter 30, because I said following this spat with Lelaine, Gawain goes ahead and actually takes a ride with Gareth Bryne, discussing loyalties and the Tower, basically how Gawain feels about the entire situation. And this is also the scene where Bryne, I think this is the scene where Bryne learns that No, I mean, it was in the last scene that his mentor learned that he was the leader of the younglings, or an oppositional group to the Rebel Aes Sedai. What Bryne is trying to do basically is he's become allegiant against Elyda's rule. That's something that he tells Gawain, and it's determined that Gawain basically hasn't made up his mind. He hasn't really made a decision of where his loyalties actually lie with regard to the Aes Sedai. His loyalty lies with Elaine and with Egwene, but he also thinks that the Rebel Aes Sedai are using Egwene, that they have manipulated her into believing she's the Amyrlin, and he seems rather confused by the fact that they legitimately respect her in that in that position, or at least that's how it seems to him. And he's like, that's weird, that's confusing. Why is Egwene letting them use her like this? This is weird. He's not really understanding, but of course he doesn't really understand the Aes Sedai politics too super deeply. But in either case, he hasn't really made a decision about where his loyalty actually lies. The only thing that he does in this scene of note is that he does not turn over any information about the younglings to Gareth, just out of respect for these people who he used to lead and who used to look up to them. And of course, Gareth tries to argue like, yeah, well, that doesn't really mean anything, kid, because they're, you don't lead them anymore. You betrayed them. So why are you still protecting them? And Gawain just continues to protect them out of respect. He assures that he's not going to turn any information over, because he's not going to do that. But he's going to do the same, the opposite direction. He's not going to give any of those hints or clues to either party. But that is the only directly White Tower plotline related stuff that goes on in this in this section of the reading. So we'll move on to Matt's plotline for now. Like I said, chapters 27 to 28, then 34, and then part of 36. And 36 will actually be leading up to something that I know about what will probably happen in next week's reading. We can't talk about all of that, but we'll mention something when it becomes relevant. In chapters 27 through 28, of course, when we left off Matt's plotline prior, it was with him and with a few others, Tom and some of the Aes Sedai. They're going out to whatever the place is called. I always forget the name of the village for some reason. Is it Snap or something like that? I genuinely can't remember, and for some reason it is not written down here. But they're going into the village in the middle of the Murundi Mountains that they have happened upon. They plan to stay the night. Matt plans to gamble and drink a little bit, and also plans to resupply a little bit for his army. And these couple of chapters are really cool because they do some of the more supernatural things that the series does every once in a while that is like really cool, really fun. I always love it when Wheel of Time gets a little bit more supernatural because it's relatively few and far between and usually has some interesting impact upon the storylines, but then it's not really focused upon afterwards and you just forget about it, which is unfortunate. But in these two chapters in particular, the very specific kind of supernatural aspect that there is going on here is just really fun. You see Matt and the others entering the village. Tom decides to go to one particular inn because there's apparently a few inns in this village for some reason. Tom goes to one of them to try to gather some information that they need about, what's coming up and just general information regarding their foes, all of that kind of stuff. The Aes Sedai go to another one to, clean up a little bit because they insisted upon coming and they're cleaning up, going to rest in the inn for the night before the group continues on. And Matt and Talmanes, with a couple of their guards, go to a different inn, which hardly appears to be much of an inn, but they go there to drink and to gamble. Despite the mayor who meets them upon, they're entering the city, they initially plan to stay the night, obviously. They plan to stay for a while. But the mayor insists that they have to leave at sundown, that no outsiders are allowed to stay after sundown. He doesn't give a specific reason why, but the reason why becomes very important before too horribly long. But in either case, they go off to their various inns to do their various things. They only have a few hours before sundown actually happens, so they aren't going to be able to have the free time, the merry old time that they were looking forward to having, that they wanted to be able to have. They're just doing what they gotta do. So, like I said, Matt and Talmanes go to a different inn to go gamble and stuff before sundown. Matt basically intentionally loses a lot of coin to some of the gambling, to some dice rolls in this inn that they're in, just to make a last desperate bet for a wagon and horses and food to fill the wagon for them to take back to their army, because alongside the curfew, the mayor seems rather insistent that they're not going to be able to trade very much. The people aren't going to be able to trade very much, not least because they don't have very much in the first place, but also there seems to be something weird going on in the village. But Matt's like, well, I'm not going to, not be able to stay for the evening. I'm not going to go back to my army tonight and also go back without anything. So instead of planning to buy supplies from people, he plans to win it through betting, because that is a little bit more of an exciting way for the people to experience that. So he does lose a whole bunch of bets, which gets all the people of this town basically rich off of his own coin, rather intentionally so, or as much as his luck allows him to do so. But eventually it comes to one last bet, one last roll of the dice, where the mayor has come in and is just like, no, we're done here. You guys need to leave. Like, it's getting late. And Matt's just like, I'll make one more bet. And, he does attempt to make that one last bet with basically the rest of his personal coin stash, which is all in this huge chest, and the people get rather anxious about this. They're just like, yeah, well, even with all the winnings that we just made off of you, we don't have enough money to bet against this particular chest here. But they opt to bet for food and stuff instead. One guy bets his wagon, like I said, wagon and horses to be able to carry food out, and basically everybody else bets a wagon load of food, and if Matt wins the bet, he'll be able to leave with the wagon and all that other stuff. Everybody else will otherwise keep the money that they won from him, and he'll be on his way, and if he loses, then they all get to just keep the chest, and not have to give him anything in return. And this bet is made against the mayor himself, where the mayor's just like, okay, but you're not going to be able to cheat, because this seems very much like something for you to be able to cheat, so I'm going to roll the dice. The mayor will roll the dice in place of Matt, because he, rolled Matt's dice to ensure that they weren't like loaded to just be able to win or anything like that. He finds that he rolls it a couple times, loses both times, like, okay, I'm going to roll these dice, but I'm going to do it in place of you. So if it is a winning roll when I roll them, you win. If it is a losing roll, you lose, type of thing. So that is the agreement. And at the end of the chapter, once wagon is loaded, it is basically right at sundown. The mayor rolls the dice, Matt wins, and the whole town is rather upset at this because, basically their entire food supply has just been won by Matt, and that's kind of a problem. And they all go back into the inn afterwards, right as the sun is going down. And this is when things start to transform in the town, and it turns into chapter 28, where all of a sudden, while they're still trying to decide what to do with like getting the wagon load of food out, and also, getting Matt's chest of coins back onto his loaded horses, all that kind of stuff, then the village just starts to attack all of them. They start bursting from all of the villages. They attack the group. They wound one of Matt's red-armed soldiers in the process quite devastatingly. Fortunately, everybody manages to escape, inflicting many casualties upon this village, but they hide out once they manage to escape. It's a very tense escape situation where it's just like, what in the world is going on here? These people don't seem to be living, like there's just something weird going on with them. Why in the world is the entire village just desperately attacking all of us, type of thing? And so they do manage to escape. They do go about an hour out of town, and they're not going to search for their group, their camp out in the dark. So they just kind of find a hiding spot and keep watch to make sure that none of the village continues to chase after them or tries to sneak upon them in the dark or something like that. But in the morning, Matt resolves to return to town, and Matt and Tom both do that. They ride back into the village after everything's said and done, and they learn from the mayor, who is still alive, and everybody else in the town, including people who they very much killed, because in escaping they did inflict casualties. Like I said, they did kill some of the villagers in the escape, and they go back, and none of the blood from the villagers is still there. The villagers themselves are alive again. It's like nothing ever happened, basically, except for the one blood stain, or the one area, the few spots where blood is to be seen or anything like that, is the blood from Matt's own red arm, for example, the one who was wounded. So very clearly something weird is happening in the town, where the villagers can die or be injured, and it's like they come back in the morning and none of that ever happened, type of thing. It did happen, but they're just alive and back in their beds. And the mayor explains to them when they ask about this, just what in the world happened? Matt says to one particular person, I killed you. I watched you die. What in the world is going on here? And the mayor is like, okay, I can assume that you guys were not killed last night, so I'm going to explain everything. And what's happening in this town is that I don't know what the actual mechanics of it are, but basically in this town, if you die in the town, you become like one of the villagers, and these villagers are in this cursed loop where no matter what happens to them in the night, they wake up the next day perfectly fine. They can't escape the town. Even if they try to leave, if they go out of town and they travel away, they end up back in their bed the next morning, no matter what anyway. They're just stuck here, and they know that this is the case. They know that this is an issue because they have had people from the outside actually visit, family members of people in the town or whatever. These people have visited, and it will still happen. These people end up dying, and then they're stuck in the town too. So that's why no outsiders are allowed in the village after sundown. It's because, well, they're probably going to die and thus be cursed to stay in the village forever. And that's not the best fate in the world, we shall say. So the mayor explains that all this is going on. It's very confusing. It's also very disconcerting, but Matt and Tom are just like, okay, we're just going to leave now. And the mayor's like, yes, please do. And they leave with their cart and chest because despite, their curse, they're not going to just steal outsiders' money or whatever they've earned or won fair and square and stuff like that. Matt does leave a little bit of gold behind anyway to basically pay for the food, however much that he can to some degree, but he is going to take the cart full of food back to his army because they need some amount of food, some amount of supplies, and they just leave. So that's what happens in chapters 27 through 28. Like I said, very disconcerting couple of scenes there. One of the cooler sections of the book for sure. I was very excited when I read them just because they were so much fun, so different. And when Wheel of Time does get supernatural in this kind of way, I always really love it. But Matt's storyline continues in chapter 34, where they have left Hintersnap behind and have approached another town in Murandy called Trustair, and Matt is pretty, anxious and untrusting at this point for obvious reasons, and he basically makes a plan to basically raid this town for what they need because he doesn't trust that they'll be able to get out of it in any meaningful way, especially not because there is clearly somebody in Trustair that is looking for Matt. There are posters of Matt and Perrin around in the village looking for them, and Matt's just like, okay, well, all of you people need to go in, raid the town, get what you can get, and then leave and disappear. And so Matt has developed these backstories for all the people in their group to go ahead and do that. He's making this plan to go ahead and do that. They're still a few weeks away from Camelin by foot, but, they need some supplies in order to be able to make it there. They know, like I said, that there is some woman apparently, who is looking for Matt with posters of his face plastered around the town, and he is determined to just go in, get the stuff, and leave, and that just be it. But before making the final preparations, let alone actually heading into town, Matt does observe within his own camp some crossbowmen doing some training in his camps, and he determines that, these crossbowmen, it's really good, it's really efficient for my army because they don't need as much training to do good with a crossbow, but the reloads are a little bit slow, they're taking a few too many seconds, and what if I could cut down that time a little bit shorter? And so he makes to go to Eludra, the illuminator, who is developing these cannons, these dragons for Matt's army, and he makes to go ask her about if she knows any potential way to be able to make the crossbows reload any quicker. She doesn't have any input on that note, but she does in turn have a couple lists of materials that she needs from Matt in order to make all of the necessary dragons. And Matt is pretty galled by the list of materials that they need. And one such list of materials is needing all of the copper and tin of Andor, Carrion, Ilion, and Tyr combined, which is a pretty crazy amount of material, and Matt has no idea how he's going to be able to do it, but given, being associated with the Dragon Reborn and the fact that they're trying to get to Camelin right now anyway, he's like, well, I can try my best to actually get this, so he agrees on that front with Eludra. But in the middle of this discussing things about the dragons with Eludra, Matt is called back by Olver to meet Viren Sadai, who has found their camp, and Viren is the one who has been looking for Matt and or Perrin, actually. She's the one that put those posters out and about. She has traveling. She reveals that she has traveling despite the village being, half a day's march away. She discovered just an hour ago before appearing at the camp that Matt was around and discovered the location of the camp, and so traveled there, and tells Matt basically what happened. She has traveling. She offers to take Matt's company to Camelin directly by the day's end if Matt strikes a deal with her, and Matt heavily considers this. And this is what takes us into Matt's particular scene of chapter 36, which is this kind of making the agreement with Viren. Let's see, which scene is it? Here it is. Viren basically explains to Matt in chapter 36 how his tavern nature basically brought her to wait for him in Murundi, how no matter what she tried to do, trying to travel elsewhere, trying to go literally anywhere else, because Matt wonders, like, why are you looking for us? Why were you just waiting for us? How is this not just coincidence? And Viren says, yeah, well, literally every single time that I tried to go anywhere except for here, right here where I am, I was not able to. And as soon as I decided that I wasn't going to try to leave from here or try to escape whatever it is that fate has brought to me, I ended up here anyway and didn't have the problems. So she's pretty convinced that she needed to be here to meet with Matt or Perrin, because she had no idea whether it would be Matt or Perrin that she actually came across. And so she's here to help them, and her offer to help Matt comes on the condition that once she drops him and his band off in Camelin, that he wait there for 10 days and open a particular sealed note that she has left for him and follow those instructions after 10 days if she has not returned by then, or he can wait there for her original proposal was 50 days, but he's able to get her down to 30 days for an agreement. Wait in Camelin for 30 days and be able to ignore the note entirely. Like, whatever the reason for that is, because Matt's pretty determined to not open the note. She's just like, okay, well, if you just wait in Camelin for 30 days for me to come back, then I will take you to Camelin. So if Matt agrees on one of these 2 points, to either wait 10 days and open the note and do what it says, or wait 30 days and then just be on his merry way, then she will take him to Camelin. And he does finally take the offer. He does finally agree to it, seeing it as an opportunity for his people to be able to rest, to be in a location that isn't the middle of absolute nowhere, fighting to survive, and also for an opportunity for him to reconnect with Elaine, plus additionally an opportunity for them to start getting the materials to make a head start on Eludra being able to make all of the various things that she needs to make for Rand, or that she's agreed to make for Matt. I said Rand just 2 seconds ago. I meant Matt, but you know what I mean. But that is basically what happens in Matt's storyline for this week's reading, and it actually puts us in a pretty solid place for where I think his storyline is going to pick up in Towers of Midnight. I don't actually think that Matt's storyline will continue in this book, and part of that is because this actually puts us in a pretty great place for Matt and Elaine, their plot lines to converge a little bit, and given that Elaine's storyline has been completely absent so far from the Gathering Storm, and I think fittingly so, I think that storyline will pick up in Towers of Midnight, and so I think Matt's will pick up alongside that, and I also think that based on Matt's meeting with Viren, the reason why Viren needs to transport Matt to Camelin and then needs him to wait there until she returns is because she needs to do something else in the meantime. She's basically just been waiting for Matt so that she could go do this thing after she deals with Matt, basically because his tavern nature wouldn't let her leave up to this point. At least that's my understanding of what's going on there. But in either case, her plan is to go somewhere and do something, and based off of the White Tower plotline of the next couple chapters, because when I'm composing or basically planning my reading out day by day, and especially when I'm planning out my approximate reading schedule for these diary videos with the Wheel of Time, one of the things that I look at is general POV allocation and storyline progress and stuff like that. It's like a basic rough way to guide how much reading I do, when I do the reading, and like I said, how much I cover in these videos. And in looking ahead, I discovered that 2 chapters ahead of where I am at now, so chapter 40 has a meeting with Viren Sedai in the title of it. I'm pretty sure that's just straight up the title of chapter 40, and it seems to me, just by the very quick scan, I don't look at details, I just go to see if I can see a name early on in the chapter to indicate whose POV it probably is, and it appears that the next few chapters are largely White Tower, Egwene stuff. So my guess is that Viren is going to transport this band to Camelin, like she promised and like Matt agreed to be able to do. She's going to go do something in the White Tower, and then, well, we'll talk a little bit more about what I anticipate from that in next week's reading here later after I get through the Rand storyline. And then Matt's storyline will pick up alongside Elaine's storyline in the next book. So I predict that this is the end of Matt's storyline. We shall now continue on and finish up this diary by talking about Rand's storyline, which does have a couple other POVs going on. You know, it's not just Rand. There's a little bit of Nynaeve. There's also a little bit of somebody else in here. But we'll talk about all these chapters basically in the order that they happen within this storyline, because it's the rest of the chapter. It's the rest of the reading. It's most of the rest of what's here, and it is all relevant in the order that it is displayed, directly one after the other. Basically a big long sequence, only interrupted by like a chapter or a scene in a few spots. So that is what we're going to cover next. Rand's storyline begins in this week's reading with chapter 29 into Bandar Iban, which sees Rand and basically everybody else in the Eredamon plotline entering Bandar Iban, which is like the westmost capital city of the territory, basically, having found that order has indeed been returned to the city by Dobrain and by the Aiel, which is what he wanted. He wanted there to be a little bit more of this order having been done in more of Eredamon, but he is decently satisfied with the fact that the city is basically under control. But in either case, Eredamon seems to be doing pretty okay, and Rand is taken in this moment to a merchant councilwoman to actually meet with her, and he learns that he learns in one of these chapters, I think it's the next chapter that we talk about here in 31, where he learns that he actually has now at this point 4 of these council members in his custody, but one of them that he meets with in chapter 29 is a particular councilwoman. I forget her name, even though it is basically relevant. I think her name is Chadmar. It seems like. Yeah, Chadmar's house. So, yeah, he's meeting with Chadmar in chapter 39 here, and commands that he gets a little bit of information out of her. This is an important thing to note, is she knows that she hasn't interacted with the king in a good long while, but there was a particular messenger from the king, from Al-Salam, who was able to communicate with some people before, she took him captive, basically, and Rand demands for the messenger of Al-Salam to be brought to him so that he can question him. That is what he wants to have done. He believes that Graendal can be found wherever it is that Al-Salam can be found, so being able to locate this messenger of Al-Salam to be able to grant that information, basically, seems to be Rand's best bet at being able to locate where Graendal's at. So that is the reason he asks for the messenger to be found, but he does do that. But that takes us into chapter 31 and 32, where we have a few different POVs of some stuff going on here. Or actually, I suppose the more relevant chapter here is just 31. It has a few different POVs within the chapter. It actually begins with Cadsuane's POV, because even though she has been exiled from being in Rand's sight, appearing her face before him, she does continue to basically shadow Rand in some sense within the city, gathering information in the city from different people about things that are going on, ways that she can continue to do her Aes Sedai plots, despite not actually being a direct advisor or councilwoman to Rand. One particular person that she gathers information from in chapter 31 is an innkeeper named Quillen, about the king. Quillen does not actually believe that there are any credible sources that have actually interacted with Al-Salam within the last 6 months. Based off of Rand's POV, we kind of understand that it's probably more like 4 months or so since somebody has actually interacted with the king, the messenger being the most likely person in that case. But innkeeper, giving Cadsuane information, does not believe that anybody has actually interacted with the king within the last 6 months. That is good information to know. Cadsuane, following this meeting with this particular innkeeper, does check on the docks to, just observe some stuff that's going on with food spoilage, general things within the city, within Eredamon in general. She does see Rand there, but because she has a hood up, she just manages to escape him basically by she disappears, not having shown her face to him. She's very much stretching the rule here, and how is she supposed to know where Rand's going to be at any given point in time? But Rand lets her go. We see from his POV multiple times throughout this week's reading in particular that perhaps he was either a bit harsh with exiling her or that he should have been more specific when exiling her, but he decides that because she is following the letter of his law and that his law was rather unspecific, he's going to be lenient and kind of let her do her thing so long as she doesn't actually break the rule that he gave to her to not let him see her face again. She does see Rand there at the docks, like I said, but then she does make to meet with some of the wise ones about an idea that she has about something to do with Rand. And we get a little bit of a hint about what this idea probably is, what this meeting is probably about as well, here at basically the end of the week's reading, so we'll get there pretty shortly. But we switch over to Rand's POV at the docks where, he notices Cadsuane scuttling off, basically, but he meets with Naif about a meeting place with the Seanchan there. We get some information about some of the political dealings that he is involved with. It seems that the Seanchan aren't happy with his pick in the Almuth Plains of Qatar being a meeting place between him and the Seanchan, because Qatar apparently seems to be a little bit too neutral of a location. So in the desire to just get a meeting with the Seanchan in, to get a meeting with Tuon in, to get a meeting with the Empress, the daughter of the Nine Moons, done and over with as quickly as possible, he decides that instead of suggesting Qatar as a meeting place now, he suggests just going to Falma, which, of course, the Seanchan actually just straight up directly control Falma at this point. So he suggests meeting in their territory, which some of his friends, some of his people aren't particularly fond of that suggestion, but, he trusts that the history of that town, being the climax of the Great Hunt, where he defeated the Seanchan basically inadvertently, where the Seanchan were pushed back after their initial attempt at the return, he trusts that history of that event, plus, the honor that the Seanchan inherently tend to have, as far as he can understand it anyway, that the Seanchan will keep from attacking him, basically, just as he intends to not attack them. He does interact with Nynaeve in this scene. He asks her about Lan, learns that Lan has been sent up to the Borderlands already to gather up his own army to basically defend Malkier, which is his old countryman's old home, basically. He tries to determine what use the Malkieri can be in the last battle. To some degree, offends Nynaeve a little bit, gets her a little bit pushy. We see a POV switch, I believe, to Nynaeve at the end of this chapter. I might be wrong about that, but, back returning to the palace, we again mention that Rand has 4 council members in his custody. There are 2 more that are dead, and then 4 more beyond that are still at large, needing to be found. He commands that the other 4 be obtained within the month, which seems to be a pretty unreasonable, expectation. But these are just things that happen in that moment. And Nynaeve asks Rand in return, kind of to get back after he asked about Lan a little bit before. Nynaeve asks Rand about Perrin and Mat, about certain things. And notably, Rand sees visions of Perrin with Galad, which is interesting, which I presume is where we'll pick up with Perrin's storyline in the next book. And then it also sees visions of Mat in Caemlyn. Again, things that I'm sure we will see actually, things we will see actually play out in the next book. Goodness gracious, my sentences have not made any sense today. I'm very sorry about that. But he assures her that they are alive. She actually asks Rand, how do you know that? And Rand's like, you wouldn't get it, basically. You wouldn't understand how I know, and it doesn't really matter that much. They are alive, and that is all that matters. And Nynaeve prods Rand about, his temper and the way that he treats certain people, because she's pretty upset about the way that he has treated her and Cadsuane and other people. And he basically kind of scares her with a little bit of an outburst in the chapter. He does actually get angry for the first time in a little while. So that's something that's a wee bit concerning. But that does, in the wake of that outburst, we get the next couple chapters, chapters 32 and 33, which are straight up Nynaeve POV stuff. Some really cool things happen in these couple chapters. Nynaeve decides that in order to deal with Rand the best way, basically, she needs to be able to convince him that he should trust her. Which is, she doesn't have all the best ideas on how to actually do this. But she does come up with some manner of plan, actually. You know, not too horribly long after this general interaction that she just had with Rand. It is after midnight or around midnight one night within, you know, the city, basically, where Nynaeve watches on the outside of the city alongside Cadsuane and some of the other Aes Sedai, you know, some ghost procession that ever since Rand has been in Eredamon has been in Bendar Eban, basically. More specifically, ever since Rand has come to this place, there's been this procession of ghosts that has occurred outside of town, or, you know, wherever it is out in the distance at midnight every night. Don't know what that's about, but it is something that has been happening, and the Aes Sedai are observing this. Returning to the palace, Nynaeve actually comes up with an idea on how to actually help Rand. I suppose it is worth noting that something that Nynaeve does in this scene, when she does return to the palace, is that on the way there, she heals a child from a particular family that are just like kind of existing, sitting out in the streets, basically homeless or something like that. There's a child that's like very close to death, and she heals him and commands the family to come back to her if he needs more healing or something along those lines. And like, I'm not entirely sure why this particular thing happens. Surely it will be relevant at some point, question mark, if it was included in here, because generally speaking, everything that has happened in this book has been relevant to something else that has happened in the book, or otherwise is looking forward relevant to something else in the series. And so I'm not 100% sure what this healing of the child is about, but it is something that happens. Like I said, it's worth noting that it occurs, just because I think it occurs for a reason, but I'm not entirely sure what that reason is. It hasn't been made clear yet. But in either case, Nynaeve does return to the palace. She commandeers a few off-duty guards who happen to be out front there, and she has the head of Chadmar's house tell her where the questioning of Al-Salam's messenger is, and she goes there. For reference, what this all means, the very quick summary sentence that I wrote there for the purposes of this video is where Rand and everybody has been staying in the city has been the house of this councilwoman, basically. And Rand had this councilwoman imprisoned because it turns out that the messenger of Al-Salam that we were talking about before, he happened to die like the day that Rand asked for him to be brought to him, or the day before Rand got here, the day before Rand needed to be able to talk to him. He apparently died, which, you know, it could be by, you know, general means, but Rand isn't so trusting of that, and because of the way that the prisoner was treated and thus allowed to die, he imprisons Chadmar instead. In the same place where the messenger was actually imprisoned. Important to note, because we'll get to that in just a second, but because this messenger died, and because Rand is looking for information about Greendale and stuff like that, that's basically what Nynaeve is after. It's just like, okay, if I can get a lead with regard to some of this information and prove that Rand can trust me as an advisor the way he couldn't trust Cadsuane, that'll be important both for me, but it'll also be good for him, because we can get some of this information. I can actually help a little bit. So that is what she is doing. In Chadmar's house, one of, you know, the head of the house is able to tell Nynaeve where it was that the questioning of the messenger was at, and Nynaeve's just like, okay, this is a good clue, let's just go to that location, figure out what we can find there. They go there. It is a candle making shop, basically, and she questions the occupants, the owners there, and gains some information about a trap door where the dungeon that Chadmar is currently being held in, the dungeon where the messenger was being questioned in, is at, because it turns out that, you know, the main person of this candle making place is the questioner for Chadmar, and that this candle making stuff is more or less just a ruse. It's, you know, a legitimate operation going on, despite there being some other stuff going on underneath that. But she gets assurances from the jailers that the messenger said nothing of the king's location, so Nynaeve can't get any information for Rand about where the king might possibly be from them, which is basically what she was hoping to try to do, actually. That was like the real thing she was trying to do here, was get information about the king's location. But she does go down and inspect the dungeons, and inspects Chadmar herself to find that she has nearly been killed to death by a subtle poisoning, specifically a type of poisoning that could be done slowly in the food that she eats, a particular type of poison included in the food that she eats, that would basically make it appear by anybody else who's not familiar with that particular thing to have been natural causes. And she assumes, based off of this, the fact that Chadmar herself is just about dead from this. She heals Chadmar, to her credit, but she notices that because Chadmar is nearly dead from this, and that the prisoner, and very conspicuous timing, the messenger of Al-Salam, and very conspicuous timing, was also killed just before Rand needed to talk to him by natural causes. She's able to put together very quickly, like, hey, the person who's preparing the food for the prisoners is probably to blame here. She's able to go back. She learns from the jailers that a relatively new apprentice boy is the person who has been doing the food prep as of recently, and he has been detained by some of the folk that she brought from Chadmar's mansion to this location. So she doesn't actually have information about Graendal's location or Al-Salam's location or anything like that, but she has learned that an old apprentice boy who was preparing food for both the messenger and Chadmar has very likely been poisoning these people. She plans to take this information to Rand directly, and in the next chapter does so. Nynaeve meets with Rand with that food boy attending the meeting. She says that she has not questioned him yet, and when Rand does question him, he is able to confirm basically that Graendal has used compulsion against the boy, that the boy was able to do these tasks because of being compelled to do so by Graendal. And, Rand kind of disconcerts Nynaeve a little bit with his knowledge about Graendal's tactics and what she's able to do with compulsion and some of this other stuff. But Nynaeve basically learns that, the boy is compelled, and that very likely Al-Salam's messenger was also compelled to one degree or another. That either case, one or both of these people would be able to lead Rand to, if not Al-Salam, at least to Graendal because of compulsion. That's what Rand's able to put together. That's what Nynaeve is able to learn from him. And Rand essentially convinces Nynaeve to heal the compulsion in the boy. He doesn't tell her the straight degree to which, healing compulsion actually can hurt people, can risk their death, and if the compulsion is deep enough, that person might just be dead. Anyway, that's basically what happens to this boy, because Nynaeve does heal the compulsion, and the boy is only able to utter 2 words, presumably just out of sheer utter hatred and, contempt for Graendal for doing this to him. He's able to mutter 2 words, Natrum's Barrow, whatever you want to call it, as the location to find Graendal, because, like I said, Nynaeve heals the compulsion. Rand is able to surprisingly get those couple of words out of the boy before he dies. Nynaeve is pretty unhappy about the fact that he made her heal him, and he died basically because of it. That's not a fun situation, but now Rand knows basically where to find Graendal, and he plans to take care of Graendal after he meets with Tuon to get a truce with the Seanchan. Nynaeve criticizes Rand for his hardness again in this moment. She berates him in, a not dissimilar way from how Cadsuane might, in the sense of like, man, you really need to lighten up. You need to open up. You need to not be so hard and so cold. You need to not be so emotionless. This is going to destroy you. And one of my favorite moments in this book so far is Rand's responding to Nynaeve in this chapter, basically Rand relates to Nynaeve a legend that Tam once told him about when he was younger, about, people, adventurers, basically, who would, choose not to climb Dragonmount, for example, because Dragonmount is very tall, and because it would take every ounce of strength of anybody who wanted to climb to the very tip top of Dragonmount to do so, they would no longer have energy to come down. So they choose not to climb Dragonmount because to do so would kill them. They would not be able to climb back down. And although this is just a legend, and Nynaeve indicates as much, Rand tells her this legend as a very stark insinuation that I am currently on this journey of climbing Dragonmount. Sometimes you do not expect to return. When you do make that journey, you do not expect to return. That is where I am at now. And it's actually a pretty scary interaction, to be honest. It's pretty nerve-wracking. Rand is here telling her, like, I am doing what I need to do for the last battle. I'm going to the last battle, but that is my Dragonmount. I am climbing Dragonmount right now. I expect to die there. And if I expect to die there, and if I expect to get done what needs to get done, I cannot have any reservations about what I'm doing. And this, like I said, it's a little bit spooky, you know. Rand indicates to Nynaeve that he actually trusts her, and he thanks her for caring more about him, the person, than Cadsuane did, because he felt like Cadsuane only cared about her plots that he happened to be a part of, whereas Nynaeve seems to actually care about the Rand that she knew growing up in the Two Rivers. And Nynaeve basically curses herself for not having an argument against what he said, not being able to push back against this idea of I am climbing Dragonmount and I will die at the end of this journey. Nynaeve is just like, I guess he's not wrong. She curses herself for not having a comeback to what he says. It was a very chilling interaction. You know, I can't really convey how epic this chapter felt to read, because a lot of the reason it felt so epic to read was like just trying to, in some sense, roleplay Rand, and just how cold and emotionless and just blank you have to be Rand, and to come off as that particular character in that moment telling that story. It's a very unsettling thing, and so that just really got to me personally. I don't know, I guess I just really liked that chapter. Chapters 32 and 33 were great. But that is going to take us to chapter 35 through 36, basically, where we have a little bit more of the stuff that are going on. You know how I mentioned that Rand now knowing the location of Graendal, and how he plans to pursue that after he meets with Tuon. Well, that is basically what chapters 35 and 36 do. Rand enters Falma in chapter 35 with a small coterie of people. You know, he's there with Nynaeve a little bit. He and Nynaeve briefly discuss some of their memories of being at Falma from way back in the Great Hunt, and they all meet with Tuon. You know, they meet with the Daughter of the Nine Moons, and the actual meeting portion of the chapter is done from Tuon's POV rather than Rand's POV, interestingly enough. And based off of some clues that we get from some other chapters, this is something that I should mention. Nynaeve, I think Nynaeve specifically, maybe Min as well, I forget, but some other people have been noticing that there are times when Rand, in doing certain things or saying certain things in particular ways, seems to have this like emanating sort of darkness around him, which kind of like puts them off a little bit. And I think the implication based off of the last couple chapters that we just discussed between Nynaeve and Rand specifically is that Rand is, I don't know if it's the implication based off of the POVs or the implication that I am drawing, that this is my interpretation, and I might be wrong, so I could totally be making this up. But I think the implication is that Rand is himself using compulsion to some degree when he gets this sort of weird dark emanating blackness around him, especially since in the meeting with Tuon here, he seems to try to use compulsion to basically gain an alliance with her. He insists that we have to make a treaty here. It is the only way for us to survive. And she, is generally inclined to agree, but they have different ideas of what that means. Rand does not intend to bow to anybody to do this. Not necessarily in a high and mighty way, but because he's not going to bow to the Shan-Chan like that. That isn't something that makes sense to him. But the Shan-Chan prophecies seem to indicate that the Dragon Reborn must bow down to the Shan-Chan, that everybody must accept the Shan-Chan Empire within these lands. So she's not inclined to just agree to a truce with him. If she's going to do that, he needs to be subservient to her to some degree. And this doesn't work out, even though while Rand is telling her this, she has a moment where she is very nearly going to agree with Rand, but she notices this dark emanating stuff around him. And so I don't think it's just him being Tavern or him being the Dragon Reborn. I think he's actually trying to use some degree of compulsion. Maybe, like I said, I could totally be making that up, but that seems to be sort of what's going on. Potentially, but Tuon manages to resist, actually. She doesn't fall into the, yeah, I'm just going to agree with the Dragon Reborn here. She instead says, no, if you're not going to, be below the Empire when we do this, we're not going to have a direct alliance in that way. And so Rand is like, okay, and he leaves, so there's no alliance, no truce, no nothing between the Shan-Chan. Rand is consigned to just saying, hey, like, if the Shan-Chan attack us from behind, nothing we could do about it. I need to prepare for the last battle, and that's where he is at. And the Shan-Chan are like, how in the world are we going to be able to, or Tuon's basically, how in the world are we going to be able to get this man to actually bow and, swear to the Empire? Like, how is this going to work out? Because she's still under those ideas of their own prophecies. In either case, like I said, Rand does leave. Tuon pronounces, immediately after Rand does leave, Tuon pronounces herself the Empress, because the reason she had not pronounced herself Empress yet, because she could have prior to this moment, is because the Empress cannot meet with anybody as equals. Anybody who she meets with as the Empress is inherently below her, and she did not think that it would be a wise decision trying to meet with Rand as the Dragon Reborn, with him already on the pretense of being below her. She wanted to meet with him as equals. That didn't go well. They did not come to an understanding. They didn't give each other time to actually come to an understanding, because both of them had very different ideas of what this potential alliance would mean. And that was not something that they actually got to discuss to any degree, really. And so, yeah, right after Rand leaves, right after this meeting is over, Tuon pronounces herself the Empress now, because she has no reason not to. In fact, it's weird that she hadn't yet, so she does it now. And also, in pronouncing herself the Empress, approves the assault that was suggested to her from last week's reading upon Tar Valon, where, of course, her generals decided that, making a move against the Aes Sedai, potentially capturing many of them, at least killing them so they're not supporting the dragon, and potentially making a move against the Dragon Reborn with an assault upon Tar Valon would be a wise course of action. Tuon had resisted doing that in favor of meeting with Rand first to determine whether they needed to. Like I said, the meeting didn't go anywhere, so she pronounces herself the Empress, and then she now approves the assault upon Tar Valon. And it is this point, this moment after chapter 35, and I guess also chapter 36, because the second scene of chapter 36 is Tuon watching as various Raken and Toraken take off with several Shan-Chan blood knives, as they're called, to begin their assault on Tar Valon. Tuon recognizes that it wasn't the reason that the meeting didn't go well with Rand wasn't necessarily because Rand was against the Shan-Chan. It was because the Shan-Chan were against Rand. And she fears that the difference between those two things, that the way that particular, I guess, relationship, if you want to call it a relationship, the reason that went down is maybe an important one. She fears that is a bigger difference than is possible to reconcile. She worries about the attack upon Tar Valon as the attack is about to begin, by wondering how much of a move against Rand it will be, and if he will ensue, I guess, a swift reprisal or something like that, and that wouldn't be good for them at all, and she kind of worries about that. But that is how those couple of chapters end. That is how that POV ends, and puts us in a place where we can sort of briefly talk about what I presume will happen next week. Because these next few chapters of the book that I'll be reading are White Tower stuff, more so than just Viren going back and meeting with probably Egwene about stuff. I'm not entirely sure, but Viren will be in the White Tower to one degree or another in these next couple of chapters, which will be relevant to Matt's storyline, I suppose. But because these next few chapters are all White Tower stuff, as far as I can tell, the next maybe 4 of them, I think, those 4 chapters are like 75 or so pages. In the Sanderson books so far, there's not been any POVs that have lasted more than 2 chapters in a row, basically, and there's not been any storylines that have gone much more than 2 or 3 chapters, and even the couple of cases where there has been 2 to 3 chapters of a particular POV in a row has all been here in the back half while we're leading up to some big stuff. You know, that Matt section from chapters 27 to 28 being a rather big sequence with that village of Hinterstadt is 2 chapters, but we have the Rand POV with the Nynaeve POV that relate to each other, chapters 31 through 33, so that's sort of a 3-chapter sequence, and then we have the chapter 35 and 36 sequence where you have a bit of Rand and Tuon stuff going on, and 37 also being a Rand POV, so you do have a little bit of this stuff happening now, but for the most part, Sanderson's books have not, or Sanderson's book here, but I get the impression that the next couple will largely be the same. You're flipping back and forth between POVs. Even if you're sticking with the same storyline, you're still kind of changing POVs, but it doesn't seem like there's as much of that jumping around from chapter to chapter over the next 4 chapters, so I'm presuming that that will just straight up be the assault upon Tarvalon, making its presence known to the White Tower, that will be a White Tower POV section just fighting off the Shan-Chan. So that's part of what I anticipate to be part of next week's reading, but that is all that I have a guess for what's going to happen in next week's reading. That's literally the only guess, is that Viren's going to be in the White Tower, and also the assault by the Shan-Chan is going to happen. Those are going to be big, and the only guess that I have for what's remaining in this book, because chapter 37 in Rand's POV is what I expected for Rand's plotline to finish the book doing, basically, to be the climactic moment. And it is not the climactic moment, but yeah, well, let's just talk about it. Rand basically plans to confront Graendal now because he'd had the meeting with Tuon. It didn't go well, but he now has the time to go and actually confront Graendal like he planned to, since he has her location. He summons Nynaeve to him, as well as another one of those merchant circle people, a snaky little man by the name of Ramshalon. He asks Ramshalon as kind of a means of getting his hubris a little bit up, his flattery and hubris a little bit up there. He asks for Ramshalon's advice, quote unquote, about besting a foe who is craftier than oneself. And Ramshalon takes some pride in his own answers. He suggests at one point a good way to deal with a foe who is craftier than yourself is to ally with them instead of battle against them. And Rand is able to use this and be like, okay, yeah, I will go ahead and send you, suggesting that you, Ramshalon, might be craftier than me. He's not, but that's the way to trick Ramshalon into doing this. I'm going to have you go and meet with this woman, Graendal, even though he doesn't use Graendal's name, obviously, and he indicates that Graendal might just be, some powerful Domani woman who he wants to have an alliance with. He's like, go and determine how she feels about me, if she's open to an alliance, or if she's not, or if she's even heard of me, or whatever's going on. Just go find out that information for me. And he makes a little gateway for Ramshalon to go talk to Graendal. And yeah, what a moment, because Rand does go ahead and send him through the gateway to do that. Rand and Nynaeve and Min follow, because this entire chapter is Min's POV. But they follow, and Ramshalon returns after a little while under Graendal's compulsion, which of course was kind of predictable, but this was Rand's plot the entire time, because Rand, following this moment, following Ramshalon's return, and chiefly under the compulsion of Graendal, basically says this woman's totally fine. Like, she's more than willing to have an alliance with you. Like, she's totally in support of you, all that kind of nonsense. And Rand is just like, he gets a little bit scary again, I'm not going to lie. He basically goes into this brief monologue of sorts. It's not really a monologue, but he does go into this brief little monologue where it's just like, back when I said that Semiraj was the first woman that I killed, like that wasn't actually true. There was another woman that I killed, and it was that one Aiel from the end of Crown of Swords when that happened. And, forgive me for killing that woman and calling it mercy. Now, forgive me for calling this mercy now. And he uses balefire to destroy the entire fortress of Natrim's barrow that Graendal has been hiding out in, including, everyone and everything else there. But he uses Barrow Fire to destroy the entire fortress. This infuriates Nynaeve, of course. Of course it infuriates her for obvious reasons, but it does seem to kill Graendal, and you can tell that it kills Graendal because her compulsion upon Ramshalon's mind, he brought Nynaeve along in this moment to have her be able to detect whether there was compulsion in Ramshalon. Like, that's how he was able to prove that he had Graendal's compulsion effect on him when he returned from meeting with Graendal, because, well, Nynaeve detected it. It was just like, this is a weave that I'm not going to, undo because it'll kill this man. Why did you do this, Rand? But like I said, Rand just uses Balefire and destroys the fortress entirely with Graendal in it, and the compulsion is completely gone from Ramshalon's mind. Nynaeve goes to detect it, it's not there, and that was Rand's plan the entire time, was basically to use that compulsion, to use Ramshalon there, and to use Nynaeve to determine and use that as proof that the Balefire, that the destruction of the palace actually killed Graendal, because he wasn't going to be able to infiltrate or let him sneak in to any degree, get close to her without her escaping or anything like that. And so this was his plan, was to just destroy the fortress, kill her with it, and to be able to prove that he killed her through the compulsion thing. Just really, really crafty and clever way to determine that, and actually really awesome moment. I thought this sequence was great. I thought it was really compelling, really well done, but following it, they all return to the palace, and like I said, Nynaeve is not very happy with Rand, and so she actually goes with Min to go meet with Cadsuane, because Nynaeve has no idea what to do with Rand at this point. She fears that Rand might be right about, the whole Balefire and destroying the Forsaken type of thing, but that, the recklessness with which he just did this, for example, could be a little bit too much. And that's basically what Cadsuane determines. But they go and meet with Cadsuane. Nynaeve tells Cadsuane everything that just happened there. And the two of them, Nynaeve and Min, are let in on enough of Cadsuane's plans, what she's got going on. And this is what I predict what she was meeting with Sora Leia, with the Aiel Wise Ones about in the previous chapter from way earlier in the reading. I'm presuming that this meeting was about what they were going to do with Rand, and Nynaeve is let in on what to do with Rand. Not entirely sure yet, because most of those reasons for doing some of this stuff has not been revealed yet, but they do give Nynaeve a command, basically, that she must locate Perrin, and that in locating Perrin, she will then be allowed to know some of the reasons why and be in on some of those plots. So the details of all of that, we're not entirely sure yet, but given that she now has this command to locate Perrin, and the fact that Perrin's plot in this book was basically just like 3 scenes or something like that, and more so just a carryover from the previous book, like, okay, we just got ourselves out of that plot, out of that subplot. We got ourselves away from that situation. Now we need something for Perrin to do now. And all of his Ashaman obviously were too tired to be able to travel anybody else out of the location that they were stuck at. And also, just generally being in a position where Perrin's plotline is pretty open to be experimented with. This end of this chapter basically gives us an indication, I think, of where Perrin's going to go in the next book. I think that's how Perrin is going to be brought back into the main storyline, particularly Rand's plotline, I'm predicting, and that's probably all going to happen in Towers of Midnight, because I do not predict the last act of this book to feature any Mat POV. I don't predict it to have any Perrin POV. Any other secondary POV stuff that it has going on, like Gawain or something like that, might appear in the form of like the White Tower storyline, like the Tarvalon, Assault on Tarvalon maybe. Things like Nynaeve's POV, maybe Min's POV might appear through the rest of Rand's plotline in the last quarter of the book, but I do have a quarter of the book left to go, and like I said, I'm pretty sure the next like 75 pages out of only 185 left are just White Tower stuff, which I think is just the Assault on Tarvalon, and so there's only 110 pages after that with which to complete the book, and I presume that basically all of that will still be Egwene/White Tower stuff, and then whatever the heck is going to happen in Rand's plotline. I have no idea what's going to happen in that plotline, but that is how I predict that The Gathering Storm is going to close, is basically just these 2 storylines, and that's it, probably. But I'm very excited to read all of that, because yeah, this material from this week was all really good. I'm loving the book a ton. I definitely see through this week's worth of reading why it is that people call The Gathering Storm peak and why they call it amongst the best of Wheel of Time. Because as is, where I'm sitting with this, I haven't been this invested in Rand's plotline specifically since Fires of Heaven, since the climax of that book when he defeated Ravin. But more than my investment in Rand's plotline, I haven't been this excited about Wheel of Time as a series since probably Fires of Heaven / New Spring, you know, the last couple books that I rated 5 stars on Goodreads. So that should go to show just what it is that I'm actually feeling about The Gathering Storm at this point. I think it will be an easy 5 out of 5, given that people say that the last couple hundred pages are the best part of the book, and I've only read part of a very little bit of the last couple hundred pages at this point. I believe it, and also given how much I've loved the White Tower stuff, I'm probably going to really like what's about to happen in the White Tower as well. Generally speaking, I would be pretty surprised if The Gathering Storm was not a top 3 book in the series by the time it's all said and done. Of course, come back next week, in which case I'll be able to basically tell you if I think that's the case, but that makes a huge return to form for the series following the last handful of books. I've been really enjoying myself, and I cannot wait to finish the book very, very soon. But that'll be the end of this diary. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was also a long video. I don't think any of the diaries for the rest of this series basically are going to be very short. And I apologize for that, but there's just so much actually going on. It's really, really great. And, you know, I'm not just giving stupid details of little things that are going on to inflate the video length on accident like I did for some of the slog books. I'm like trying to condense as much information into as short a period of time as I can, and it's not working very well, and the videos are still really long, so that it's just, I'm so glad that there's stuff happening. I'm loving this book, but like I said, I'm excited to finish it, and I will have it finished, and we'll have the final diary for The Gathering Storm ready for you guys next week. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys there.